The Galactic Empire, a force of unimaginable size and power, had swept across the stars, conquering civilizations and bending them to its will for centuries without meeting any serious opposition. They had crushed fleets built by races far older and more advanced than humanity could ever hope to be. But as they ventured deeper into the unknown, their sensors picked up something strange: a planet on the far edge of the galaxy, one that had never been recorded in any star charts. Not one of their probes or ships had ventured this far before, and the Empire commanders were intrigued. They assumed it was an anomaly, something to be dealt with swiftly, as they had done countless times before. But there was something unsettling about this unknown world. The planet itself was not remarkable in any way. It was an average world circling a middle-aged star, no major resources to extract, no technological marvels to exploit, just a typical planet that could easily be erased from existence with a single command. And yet the sensors showed ships in orbit. The ships were tiny and looked primitive. Their energy signatures were faint, almost non-existent. Compared to the massive fleets the Empire commanded, their hulls barely visible to their scanning technology, as if they were constructed from the most rudimentary materials. The Empire decided to send a scouting fleet to investigate this strange occurrence, a mere formality to assess the situation and ensure nothing would threaten their expansion efforts. They arrived with overwhelming force, their massive warships dwarfing the small human ships in orbit. But they expected nothing from these insignificant vessels. They issued a simple message in the universal tongue, asking the inhabitants of the planet to surrender and submit to the will of the Empire. There was no response at first. Then came the strangest transmission, a series of high-pitched sounds, followed by what could only be described as laughter. The laughter echoed through the communication channels, filling the Empire fleet with confusion. Their commanders stood at attention, puzzled. Not only had the humans not responded to their demands, they had dared to laugh at the Empire, a species so far beneath them that their very existence should have been ignored, yet here they were mocking them. At first, the Empire commanders assumed it was some sort of malfunction or miscommunication. They tried again, sending a warning, this time threatening annihilation if the humans did not submit immediately. But still the laughter continued. It wasn't an act of defiance or anger. It was a simple and unrelenting laughter, as if the humans were simply entertained by the Empire's presence. And this confused the Empire even further. How could these tiny, insignificant creatures not understand the gravity of the situation? Their sensors detected nothing of particular interest about the ships in orbit. They were primitive, nothing more than metal and glass welded together, with a few rudimentary propulsion systems. But still they laughed, and the sound of their laughter began to grow louder, as if they were mocking the Empire's power. And for the first time, the Empire's commanders began to feel something they had never felt before: doubt. It wasn't fear, it wasn't terror, but a strange unease crept into their minds. How could these insignificant beings be so confident? How could they laugh in the face of certain destruction? And yet, as the laughter continued, the Empire began to wonder if perhaps they had underestimated humanity. The Empire commanders gathered around their holographic table, their faces drawn tight with suspicion as the human laughter continued to echo through their comm channels. It was like nothing they had ever encountered before. They had expected fear or submission from a species so far beneath them. But instead, they were met with mockery, and what could only be described as amusement. The tiny ships in orbit remained still, as if daring the Empire to strike. But there was something about the human response that struck at the heart of their pride. These beings, who should have cowered, had instead chosen to laugh, and the more the Empire listened, the more their confidence began to erode. The commanders decided that the only way to deal with this insolence was to act decisively. They ordered their ships into formation and prepared to unleash their full firepower on the tiny human vessels. The Empire's warships were armed with weapons capable of obliterating entire planets, and they had no doubt that these small ships would be reduced to debris within moments. The order was given, and the fleet's weapons powered up. But the humans did not stop laughing. In fact, their laughter grew louder and more chaotic. It was as if they were mocking the very concept of the Empire's might. As the Empire's weapons fired, the humans did the last thing anyone expected. They did not try to outrun the attack or brace for impact. Instead, they performed an impossible maneuver that no one in the Empire could have predicted. The small human ships began to twist and spin in wild, unpredictable patterns defying every law of physics that the Empire understood. They dodged the barrage with a grace and agility that made no sense for ships of their size and construction. The Empire watched in stunned silence as their powerful weapons missed by mere inches over and over again, hitting nothing but empty space. The commanders looked on in disbelief. It was as if the humans knew exactly where to go at every moment. They seemed to anticipate the Empire's attacks before they even occurred. It was clear that these humans weren't just lucky, they were doing something that made the Empire's advanced technology look primitive. In the midst of this chaos, the Empire commanders ordered a second wave of attacks. They would not be outmaneuvered so easily. This time they deployed more ships and fired in concentrated waves of destruction, hoping to overwhelm the human defenses. But again the humans laughed, and the impossible maneuvers continued. The tiny ships zipped around the Empire's fire with such precision that it felt less like an accident and more like a calculated strategy. The Empire fleet could hardly keep up. Their weapons fired in rapid succession, but the humans danced through the blasts, as though the laws of motion no longer applied to them. The commanders gripped their consoles in frustration. Nothing they did seemed to have any effect. Yet through all this, the humans didn't seem scared or worried. They didn't panic or try to flee. Their laughter continued as if they were enjoying the spectacle, as if they were playing some kind of game. And with each passing moment, the Empire's initial confidence turned into genuine concern. How could these humans be so bold? How could they laugh at the Empire's power as if they had nothing to fear? The Empire's arrogance had blinded them to the fact that their greatest weapon was no match for the spirit of a species that refused to bow down. And the more they tried to strike down these laughing humans, the more they realized they were fighting against something far beyond their comprehension, something they had never encountered before. As the battle raged on, the Empire's commanders began to realize they were facing something unlike any foe they had ever encountered before. Their ships fired relentlessly, yet the humans evaded every blast with such unpredictable agility. It was as if the tiny ships were mocking their every move. The more the Empire tried to impose their might, the more the humans laughed. The sound of it echoed across the communication systems, almost like a challenge in itself. The Empire's commanders were now visibly agitated, no longer the confident conquerors they once were. Their fleet's massive warships continued to fire wave after wave, but each attempt seemed futile. The humans were too fast, too erratic. They couldn't even get a lock on their targets, and every time they missed, the laughter grew louder. It wasn't just the humans' maneuvers that confused the Empire, it was their complete disregard for the situation as a threat. There was no fear in their voices, no desperation, no attempt to even defend themselves properly. Instead, they seemed to be playing a game of sorts, as if the Empire's firepower was nothing more than an amusing diversion from something more important. Frustration mounted within the Empire as they watched their ships struggle against a force that made no sense. Their fleet was a symbol of power and dominance, yet against the humans, they seemed like children trying to swat at an elusive fly. No matter how many weapons they unleashed, the humans simply avoided them with what appeared to be ease, and they kept laughing as though the Empire's efforts were nothing more than an annoying distraction. The humans were clearly unafraid. And that was the strangest part for the Empire. After all the destruction they had caused in the galaxy, they were used to fear being the first reaction from any new species they encountered. And yet here they were faced with a species that not only didn't fear them, but actively taunted them in their laughter. It was an insult to everything the Empire stood for. One of the commanders began to grow increasingly uneasy as he watched a small human ship effortlessly dodge a barrage from his flagship. The human vessel performed a sharp turn in midair using a maneuver that should have torn it apart. Instead, the ship danced around the incoming fire, as though it had been doing so for centuries. The commander could not understand it. His entire fleet was built on advanced technologies, designed to predict and counteract any movement in the cosmos. Yet against these humans, it was like they were playing a game that the Empire was simply not invited to join. "Sir, what are they doing?" one of the officers asked in disbelief. "I don't know," the commander muttered through gritted teeth, "but they're not just running, they're not even scared." The human ships seemed to almost predict their attacks, as if they had mapped out every move the Empire would make long before they even began firing. It was impossible to comprehend how this was happening. These ships shouldn't be able to move like this. They shouldn't be able to evade the Empire's weapons with such precision, yet they were doing it again and again. The commander's frustration grew into a simmering rage. Enough of this nonsense. He snapped and ordered his fleet to fire in a concentrated barrage on one of the human ships, aiming to overwhelm it. With sheer numbers this time, there would be no evasion. There was no way they could escape all of it at once. But as the Empire fired, the humans did the unthinkable. They didn't flee or attempt to escape. They simply continued to laugh. And in doing so, the impossible happened. The human ship did not just evade the attack, but it countered it. It fired back in a way that completely blindsided the Empire fleet. The first human strike hit a ship in the Empire's rear, catching them completely off guard and sending shockwaves through the entire fleet. The laughter grew even louder, and the Empire commanders could only watch in disbelief as their supposed victory slipped away. The Empire had never faced an enemy that laughed in the face of certain destruction, and it was quickly becoming clear that their pride and power were no match for the audacity of the humans' response. The Empire fleet was in chaos. What had started as a routine mission of dominance was now spiraling into an unexpected nightmare. Their most advanced warships, equipped with the finest technology the galaxy had ever seen, were being outmaneuvered by ships that should not even have been capable of flight, let alone combat. And still, the humans continued to laugh. It wasn't mocking or defiant laughter. It was lighthearted, full of joy, as if they were in the middle of a game, not a battle for survival. This laughter seemed to pierce through the Empire's resolve, a reminder that the humans were not merely fighting. They were enjoying themselves. The Empire commanders convened in their war room, faces flushed with frustration and disbelief. They had watched as human ships dodged attack after attack with seemingly impossible agility. The human vessels twisted and darted, each movement more erratic than the last. The commanders had ordered concentrated fire, assuming that such unpredictability would be overwhelmed by sheer firepower, but the humans had simply danced around the barrage, their laughter echoing through the comm channels. It was as if their ships were no longer obeying the laws of physics. "Prepare for the next phase," the commander barked. He was desperate now, a hint of fear creeping into his voice. "Deploy the bombers. We'll overwhelm them with firepower this time." He had seen enough. The Empire's bombers were a deadly force, capable of razing entire cities with a single strike. Surely this would put an end to the farce. The bombers launched from the flagship, their engines roaring as they cut through the void toward the human ships. The humans, of course, continued to laugh. The bombers approached their targets, and this time, they didn't bother with individual shots. The Empire unleashed everything they had in a blanket barrage, the skies above the humans filled with countless explosive payloads. They would be caught in this net. There was no escape. But once again, the humans did the unthinkable. The ships that should have been destroyed by the sheer magnitude of the assault didn't just evade. They split, they spun, they dove, they ascended in ways that defied logic. One human ship, seemingly out of nowhere, sped directly toward the massive bombers, drawing the full brunt of the Empire's firepower. For a brief, terrifying moment, the Empire thought they had finally cornered one of the ships. But instead of being reduced to debris, the human ship released a burst of energy that blinded the sensors of the Empire fleet. The bombs detonated prematurely, scattering harmlessly across the empty space. The human ship didn't stop. It rocketed through the explosion and came out the other side untouched. The laughter resumed, louder than ever, and this time, it was joined by the sounds of engines revving. The human pilots weren't just avoiding destruction. They were enjoying it, using the very chaos as a playground. They were faster, smarter, and more unpredictable than anything the Empire had ever faced. The Empire commanders could not believe what they were seeing. Their bombers were in disarray, their fleets confused, and the once unshakable confidence that had marked their every conquest was now shattered. These humans weren't just evading destruction. They were turning the battle against them. What had once been a show of force had turned into a spectacle of failure. The human ships mocked the Empire not just with their laughter, but with their skill, their creativity, and their uncanny ability to turn every attack into a joke. The commander looked around the room, his face pale. "Is this what they call human ingenuity?" he muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. But one thing was clear: whatever it was more than just a fight. It was a humiliation. The humans were showing the Empire that not even their best could stand against a species that had learned how to survive through unpredictability and joy. For the first time in centuries, the Empire's superiority seemed like a distant memory, and their next move would need to be something beyond firepower, beyond sheer strength. But what could they do against an enemy that fought with laughter and the will to win without fear? The Empire fleet was faltering. Each new move they made was countered with ease, and every attack they launched seemed to miss its mark. The humans were not just surviving. They were thriving, twisting the very nature of warfare into something unrecognizable. The commanders, once so confident in their might, now stood on the brink of despair. How had this happened? How had a fleet of tiny, primitive ships made a mockery of the Empire's finest warriors? The human laughter, once a mere curiosity, now resounded like a drumbeat, growing louder with each passing moment. It had become a symbol of defiance, a rallying cry that seemed to mock the Empire at every turn. The humans had not only survived, they had turned the tide of battle into their own game. The laughter wasn't born of fear or arrogance, but of pure joy. They weren't just playing with the Empire, they were dancing around it, dodging every attack with movements so fast and erratic that the Empire's precision weapons couldn't even keep up. "Activate the disruptors," one of the commanders barked, his voice cracking. "We need to scramble their systems. Nothing else is working." It was a desperate move, one that could blind the human ships, but it was their last hope. The disruptors were a powerful tool, capable of short-circuiting enemy systems. With this, they could at least ground the humans and stop their erratic maneuvers. The fleet activated the weapons, sending a pulse of electromagnetic energy across the battlefield. The Empire watched, hoping this would finally put an end to the nonsense. But again, the humans did the unthinkable. Instead of being disabled, the tiny human ships seemed to thrive. They didn't just dodge the pulses, they absorbed them. The disruptor energy was absorbed into their systems and instantly converted into a burst of speed. It was as though the humans had turned the Empire's own weapons against them. They used the pulse to propel themselves faster, further, and with even more unpredictable movements than before. The Empire's commanders watched in stunned disbelief. "How are they doing this?" one of them whispered, his voice filled with awe. "They're turning our weapons into a game," another officer said. "They're using our own energy to fuel their chaos. It's as if they understand us better than we do ourselves." And so, the humans continued to laugh, weaving through the pulse fire with astonishing ease. They danced and darted between the Empire's ships, creating chaos where there should have been control. The Empire's ships tried to regroup, tried to focus their fire, but the human ships were everywhere at once, moving in ways that couldn't be predicted. Their actions defied every assumption the Empire had about warfare. Then something even stranger happened. The human ships began to launch what looked like simple drones, small, unarmed, and harmless. But these drones weren't there to attack. They weren't weapons at all. Instead, they scattered in all directions, confusing the Empire's targeting systems even further. The drones didn't simply move. They emitted strange signals that created a false perception of mass, making it even harder for the Empire's sensors to track the human ships. The result was pure chaos. The Empire fleet, once organized and disciplined, was now disjointed, firing on everything and nothing at the same time. The commanders were scrambling to issue orders, but they couldn't keep up. The humans were everywhere, laughing, moving, playing with them like they were nothing more than toys. The Empire's most advanced technology was being undone by the simplest of tricks, and their pride, built on centuries of dominance, was crumbling. As one of the human ships darted between two larger Empire vessels, it broadcast a single message. The words appeared on the screen, simple yet brimming with audacity. "Is that all you've got?" It was a challenge, an invitation, and it left the Empire commanders reeling. They had thrown everything they had at these humans: weaponry, tactics, strategies, and still the humans were laughing, winning, and outsmarting them at every turn. The very concept of war had shifted. The humans weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting to prove something greater, that the Empire's power was not enough to crush the spirit of those who refused to bow. In the face of the Empire's greatest military might, the humans had not only survived, they had transformed the battlefield into their own arena, turning every shot fired into a punchline and every close call into another victory. And still, the laughter rang through the comms, reminding the Empire that they had just met a species unlike any they had ever faced. The Empire fleet was teetering on the brink of collapse. The human ships were everywhere, their movements erratic and unpredictable, making it impossible for the Empire's sensors to track them. What was once an overwhelming show of power had turned into a humiliating spectacle. Every move the Empire made was countered with ease, and every attack they launched missed by inches, only to be met with the sound of laughter that filled the comms channels once again. The humans weren't just surviving. They were enjoying the entire thing, almost as if they were playing a game at the Empire's expense. The commanders, who had once been confident in their superiority, now found themselves scrambling to understand how this could be happening. How could such primitive, seemingly insignificant ships defy everything they knew about warfare? How could a species so small and young outmaneuver them with such ease? It was a question that burned in the minds of every officer aboard the Empire's flagship. They had watched their bombers, their most advanced weapons, and their greatest tactics all fail to stop the humans, who continued to dance around them with joy in their voices. "We need to rethink our strategy," one commander finally admitted, his voice tinged with frustration. "This isn't just about firepower anymore. We're losing. We need to find a way to fight on their terms." Another commander slammed his fist on the table. "We don't have time for that. We're already in the midst of battle. We can't just change course now." But as they argued, the humans continued to move, their ships like dancing specks in the vastness of space. Each human ship seemed to be operating on a different level of awareness, as if the pilots could anticipate the Empire's every move. And still, their laughter echoed through the comm channels, mocking the Empire's every attempt to bring the battle to a close. It was at that moment that the commander of the Empire's flagship realized the truth. They weren't just fighting ships, they were fighting an entire mindset. The humans had a way of thinking that didn't adhere to the traditional rules of combat. They didn't see the battle as something to be won through brute force. They saw it as something to be won through wit, creativity, and above all, joy. Every time the Empire attempted to impose their will, the humans turned it into a joke, using the very chaos of battle as a weapon against them. "Enough," the commander muttered under his breath, leaning over the console. "We need to force them into submission. We need to show them the full extent of our power." With a signal, the Empire deployed its final trump card, the ultimate weapon. It wasn't just a ship or a fleet. It was a force of nature itself, a massive planet-destroying superweapon that could obliterate entire civilizations in an instant. The weapon's targeting systems locked onto the human fleet, and the Empire was ready to end this madness once and for all. They launched the attack, unleashing a wave of destruction that could incinerate the entire area. But once again, the humans did something unexpected. Instead of retreating, running, or trying to evade, they did the one thing the Empire had not anticipated. They accepted the challenge. They didn't cower. They didn't fear the weapon. They used it. The human ships, now operating with a level of skill and coordination no one had thought possible, synchronized their movements in perfect harmony. They rushed towards the destructive blast, weaving between the beams of energy as if they were a part of the attack itself. It was no longer about survival. It was about taking control of the situation. And as the massive blast hurtled toward them, the humans laughed once more. But this time, it wasn't just mocking. It was triumphant. The humans did not destroy the weapon, nor did they simply evade it. They took the energy, absorbed it, and used it to propel themselves beyond the reach of the Empire's ultimate power. The Empire's weapon, designed to bring an end to everything in its path, was now being used to fuel the humans' victory. For the first time in the history of the Empire, the commanders were not just shocked. They were scared. The humans had turned their greatest strength into their greatest weakness, showing them that no matter how much power they had, it would never be enough to control those who could turn the tide of battle with a simple shift in mindset. The humans were not just laughing. They were showing the Empire what true freedom and creativity could do. The question on every commander's mind was no longer how they could defeat the humans, but how they could fight against something so unpredictable, so irrepressible. The Empire's flagship drifted in silence, its vast array of weaponry still humming with unused power. The final strike, the last desperate measure they had relied on, had been turned against them. The humans, once considered insignificant and naive, had taken what should have been their doom and transformed it into their greatest triumph. The commanders on the bridge stared at the screens, unable to comprehend what had just transpired. The human fleet, once seemingly small and powerless, was now growing bolder, more confident, and their laughter had grown quieter, but the defiance in their voices was unmistakable. The battle had reached an unexpected tipping point. The humans had made it clear that they were not fighting to survive. They were fighting to teach, to show the Empire that no matter how much firepower, no matter how much technology, there would always be someone who could outwit, outmaneuver, and outlast even the most powerful forces in the galaxy. This was no longer a struggle for dominance. It was a lesson in the limits of control. "We have to act quickly," one of the commanders said, his voice now trembling. He had seen his share of battles, had led countless conquests, but never had he felt so helpless. "We can't afford to lose face. Our reputation is at stake." Another commander nodded, a cold fury creeping into his eyes. "We'll teach them to fear us. We'll show them that the Empire's might is not something to be taken lightly." But the first commander hesitated. He had seen it now, the truth that had eluded him for so long. The humans didn't fear them. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. Fear was the foundation of control, and without it, they were nothing. The Empire had relied on fear for centuries, used it to suppress and conquer, but the humans were showing them a different way, a way that didn't require fear, didn't depend on domination. "Perhaps it's not fear we need," the first commander murmured, half to himself. "Perhaps it's something else." The humans were not just warriors. They were innovators, dreamers, thinkers who had learned to work together in ways the Empire had never considered. They weren't bound by the same limitations of structure and hierarchy. The humans had brought something to this war that the Empire never could have imagined. Play, freedom, the ability to see a challenge not as a threat, but as an opportunity to explore, to grow, to create something new. The human ships, no longer just avoiding death, had become a blur of motion, an unchained force moving through space like a storm. They weaved between the Empire's fire, each shot an insult to the idea of perfect control. It was as though the humans were seeing the battlefield as a canvas, and they were the artists. Every move was a brushstroke, every evasion a masterpiece. They were no longer just fighting. They were creating chaos in the purest form, and in doing so, they were breaking the very idea of what warfare was supposed to be. "I don't think we're fighting a war anymore," the first commander said quietly, eyes wide. "I think we're fighting a revolution." At that moment, the full scale of the situation began to sink in. This wasn't just about a defeat on the battlefield. This was about the collapse of an entire worldview, the Empire's way of life. Its unquestioned belief in power and control was being dismantled right before their eyes by a force that was free from those constraints. The humans weren't just winning. They were redefining what it meant to win. "Can we stop them?" one of the officers asked nervously, as the human ships continued to outmaneuver every move the Empire made. The commander didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared out at the stars, his mind racing through every strategy, every weapon, every idea the Empire had ever used to crush opponents. And yet, none of it seemed to matter. The more they tried to impose their will, the more the humans slipped through their fingers. "I don't know," he finally admitted, "but I do know this. We cannot defeat them by fighting like we always have. The battlefield has changed." And with that, the commander realized that the greatest weapon the Empire had was no longer enough. Power, domination, fear, none of it mattered against a force that played with them, outwitted them, and laughed in the face of their might. The humans had proven it. The only way to fight them was on their terms, and no one in the Empire was prepared for that kind of war. The battle had slowed to a standstill, and yet the tension in the air was palpable. The Empire's commanders, once so confident in their might, were now gripped by a sense of helplessness they had never known before. Their greatest weaponry, their most advanced technology, their vast fleet, they had all been rendered meaningless against an enemy that refused to play by any of the rules they understood. The humans had taken the war beyond mere survival and destruction. They had turned it into a test of imagination, of adaptability, and of freedom itself. The humans, in all their unpredictability, had shown the Empire that there was no real victory when the definition of battle was constantly shifting. The Empire's officers sat in silence, each of them realizing that the war they had waged, the domination they had taken for granted, was not just being lost, it was being rewritten. There was no longer a clear path to victory, only an open-ended question about what had been gained and what was now slipping away. A voice broke the silence. "What are we to do now?" It was a whisper, a question that echoed the thoughts of every officer present. They had not just faced an enemy, they had faced a transformation in everything they thought they knew about power, control, and warfare. The commander who had initially led the charge stood before the fleet's central viewports, staring out at the swirling lights of space. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle in. It was a feeling he had never experienced before, an unsettling realization that he had been part of a cycle that was now coming to an end. "We could keep fighting," he said slowly, turning to face his officers. "We could continue to throw more resources at them, to try to break them down with sheer force. But the humans have shown us something we cannot ignore. The more we try to control them, the more they show us how futile our control really is." He paused, letting the words sink in. "They don't need to win the way we think they should. They are already winning." The officers exchanged glances, uncertainty clouding their expressions. "But we can't just surrender," one officer said, though his voice lacked conviction. "We are the Empire. We cannot be defeated like this." The commander shook his head. "Not all battles are fought with weapons. The humans have proven that. What we have learned today is not how to destroy them, but how to adapt, to understand that what we once believed made us invincible is, in fact, our greatest weakness." Another officer stood, his face pale. "So we do nothing. We just give up." "No," the commander replied firmly. "We evolve. We have to learn from this. The Empire will survive, but only if we change the way we think about war, about power, about control." The room fell into a heavy silence again, but this time it wasn't one of defeat. It was one of understanding. The humans had not just won a battle, they had changed the very nature of conflict. The Empire, for all its might, had been forced to face the reality that power was no longer enough. The victory of the humans was not just in their laughter, in their unpredictable movements, but in their ability to break free from the chains of a system built on control. In the end, the battle had not been won with weapons or strategies. It had been won with something much more profound: the ability to see the world differently, to find joy and freedom in the chaos, and to challenge the very idea that victory could only be defined by domination. As the Empire fleet retreated, leaving the human ships to drift victorious through the stars, the laughter that had once seemed so alien now seemed like a victory cry, a celebration not of destruction, but of something far more powerful: the triumph of the human spirit over the rigidity of the Empire's rules. The humans had not just fought back. They had shown the galaxy that true strength lay not in the ability to destroy, but in the ability to change the game entirely. And with that, the Empire's reign, though not over, was irrevocably altered. The humans had given them a lesson that would echo throughout the galaxy for generations to come: that no matter how much power one holds, there is always a way to outsmart, outmaneuver, and ultimately outlast. The Empire had learned that no one, not even they, could ever truly control everything.